Anki Doris Sambat. I hope you slept well. Did you sleep well? Are you safe? And as far as the floods are concerned, please leave us word on our comment section. Are you safe? Is there a need for help where you are? The team that is following on social media will be able to share hotlines depending on where you are. So do talk to us and let us be of help this morning. We want to catch up with the current affairs today. We are all about the global today. We'll be looking at the internal affairs, bilateral relationships, flooding, which has not only affected Kenya. As we are speaking, China is talking about flooding, Burundi, Tanzania, even in as far as UK. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is need to follow closely what the experts will say. Are we ever prepared for natural disasters and tragedies? Schools will be reopening in very few days. Last year in December, something similar happened. The places where schools were destroyed. But even as we're speaking, so is funding enough to mitigate these particular disasters? What is the voice of Kenya Red Cross this far? We'll give you all the details this morning. And one day, around 15,000 years ago, a wall of ice 2,000 feet tall and 30 miles wide suddenly broke wide open, and it was unleashed one of the largest floods that we know of in the earth, or rather in the history of earth. So let's find out more after this very short recap of the papers this morning. The hashtag is Global Today. You're watching KTN News. This is the Morning Prime. Let's start with our own production right here. This is what the dailies look like this morning on the front page of The Standard. Coming to your screen shortly. The front page of The Standard is all about matters health. The doctor's deal breaker. Interns pay. A disagreement over what medical interns should be paid. Sank a return to work formula negotiated by striking doctors and the government, with authorities saying they have agreed on all but one of 19 demands by health practitioners, extending Kenyan suffering. More of that on pages 4 to 5. There's also wrote at City Hall, you are a letdown. UDA MPs now warn Sakaja. You'll see more of that on the national page 10. British to engage the Maasai on the national page 7. Pain of expensive loans, now taking it to the business page 19 of The Standard. And on matters sports page 32, Barca coach hits out at La Liga. But of course, just following closely is the flooding havoc as heavy rains pound the country on page 18 of our own production right here on The Standard. And Kenya's unpreparedness in the face of heavy rains pounding various parts of the country has been exposed, with the raging flood waters submerging houses, cutting off roads and damaging millions worth of property. You can see an image there of the situation as is, and that particular picture is of a house that is submerged in Mobina Estate, Joska, as heavy rains continue to wreak havoc across many parts of the country yesterday. But Azimio wants independent Ogola inquiry. Azimio wants independent Ogola inquiry, also at the edge of the paper. But just giving you another very quick glimpse there on page 6 of that developing story. Essentially, this is a conversation that began right after the demise of the late General Francis Ogola, the voice of the opposition, strongly demanding probe into the helicopter crash. We'll discuss why that position is important, who will be taking charge, and what that means for the country externally, in as far as internal relations and external relations with Kenya are concerned. So basically, doctor strike and the floods taking center stage this morning on the show, and of course on the front page of the newspaper. Different voices, including that of Felix Koskei, Susan Nakumincha, and Davji Atela, taking it to the front page, showing you what exactly is in progress or no progress in as far as the doctor strike is concerned. All right, let's also look at other key papers this morning, but keep sending us your thoughts and feedback on the same. We're just looking at the paper review this morning. And let's take a look at the Daily Nation. This is what you wake up to on the Daily Nation. Right above the paper, how Homa Bay County is winning the war against killer malaria is at the top of the paper. More details on page 13. Haki kwa daktari Mkenya. All right, Lipa kama CAS, Lipa kama deni. A placard carried there by a doctor or a medical practitioner. And cabinet rules out increased salaries for intern doctors. At the back page, they have more details on that headline. Now, on the main story this morning, captured on the front page of Daily Nation, Azimio demands Ogola inquest. For the term as postponed, memorial service for General Ogola scheduled for Friday has been put off indefinitely. It's now what they term a row, and opposition leaders yesterday upped the ante on calls for thorough investigations to unearth the cause of the tragic helicopter crash that claimed the lives of Chief of Defense Forces Francis Ogola and 9 others last week, with a fresh push to set up a public judicial inquiry. More of that on pages 4, 5, and 5 of the Daily Nation. Now you see an image there of Wafula Chebukati, and Chebukati now fails to make a cut in hiring of appellate judges on page 8 of the Daily Nation. And an obituary, adios, Washington Akumu, the business writer sent by the gods of journalism on page 2. May the Lord rest his soul. But flooding is also taking it to the front page of the Daily Nation this morning, and we're seeing underwater Kenyans in agony amid heavy floods. Rains havoc this morning into today, and flooded apartment blocks yesterday at 360 Degrees Estate in Syokimau, Machakos County, after heavy rains on Monday night. In the inset is residents of Supercare Apartments in Ruaka, Kiambu County, salvaging their belongings yesterday. Heavy rains across the country have left a trail of deaths, destruction, and displacements. We're going to be talking about this disaster this morning. Let's also understand what the weatherman is saying. Regardless, stay vigilant. Let's just wrap up the Daily Nation at that point. But we also have the Star this morning, the People Daily, and the Business Daily. Let's quickly look at the front page of the Star. Now, all right. Now, multi-agency team combs villages for copter crash victims' valuables on the Star, page 10. All right. Now, what we're seeing here as the main headline, however, is on matters governance and elections fixing IEBC. Experts call for strong agency. Terming it as wrangles, proposed law does not solve a power play between chair and the CEO. The new bill abolishes vice chair's post, raises quorum to 5, and forces chair to consult. More of that on pages 4 to 5. But how far are we with the IEBC conversation? We'll hear shortly. Another very main story, and has, of course, cut across each of the papers this morning, is matters floods, and Kenyans are stranded as rains batter country. Flooding persists. And in that image coming to your screen shortly, vehicle submerged in flood waters after heavy rains at Landi Mawe. Water Cabinet Secretary Zakaria Njeru in a grey shirt, of course, if it is visible. And also we're seeing the Busia woman representative, Catherine Omanyo, riding on a boat to assess flooding in Bunyala sub-county. Residents of Mathare are caught up in the floods as well in the Nairobi slum. This is a major story this morning. Even as we're reviewing these papers, it's very important that you let us know in the comment section what exactly is happening at your doorstep. Are you safe? All right, the flood story is a key development today in as far as weather is concerned, and we'll be looking at climate globally. Remember, Kenya hosted the Africa Summit last year, which was one of its kind. But are we learning any lessons this far? Veteran journalist Akumu dies after gallant fight for life on page 3. Mystery of 600 million shillings pipeline land sold at 7 million shillings, and elderly sibling tussle over father's estate at 20 years old on pages 3, 8, and 9 respectively on the Star. All right, let's take a look at matters business this morning. That is the Star. But when we look at the front page of the Business Daily this morning, for those following the economy of the country and Mambo ya Pesa, what we're seeing here is Kenya seeks U.S. support in fresh hunt for cheap loans. Coming to your front to the page on the Business Daily this morning. Treasury asks U.S. support in liability management and get debt guarantees to de-risk country when borrowing. All right, of course, you're seeing it right there. with the image of Treasury Cabinet Secretary Njuguna Ndung'u. So far, this is where we are at as a country. Get more analysis on the same, but also above that headline, industrialization does not happen independently. It needs investments, coordinated efforts, and carefully designed policies. I will indulge the guests on that particular discussion as well. More of that on page 9 of the Business Daily. Now, on the People Daily this morning, so that we can also hear the guest thoughts on some of these front pages, because of course it is important that we hear a word or two on the matters taking center stage. But on the People Daily's front page this morning, big names in tough fight for slots at appeal court. All right, big names in tough fight for slots at appeal court. Taking it to page 5, we're looking at the faces of Hassan, Ongudi, Kigen, Nzioka, Chebukati, and Mahiri Zaja. But the shame of stealing from dead soldiers. What now is coming in under the probe as the journeys of gallant military men came to a tragic end in helicopter crash. First responders made away with valuables including watches, phones, and boots. More of that on page 4. The front page of the People Daily having that covered in a nutshell. But state rules out more pay for striking medics. On matters doctors strike, this is where most citizens are eyeing to understand what the future holds when staying together for the sake of children on matters parenting and family on pages 22 and 23. While members of parliament kicked a Ruto ally out of housing committee, something very important also now taking stage on page 2 of the People Daily. All right, now let's also wrap this up with the front page of Taifa Leo, which is very, very important for you who is following the show this morning. Unajiuliza kwani gazeti zote za kizungu? Hapana, kuna ya Taifa Leo. Let us look at the front page of the Taifa Leo this morning, giving us in a nutshell what is expected to develop in the day. Coming to your screen shortly, it is all about the late General Ogola. Azimio Yakaba Serikali. This is the headline this morning on Taifa Leo. Pressure, they term it. Raila na wenzake wataka kamati ya pamoja ya bunge iundwe kuchunguza hadharani kiini cha ajali ya ndege ya wiki jana. Pia wapinga jopo la kijeshi lililobuiniwa na Rais Ruto. Now this is the main story this morning as well, and as far as the probe into the crash is concerned. Once again, may the general's soul and the rest of the 9 gallant soldiers rest in peace. Let's start with this headline, gentlemen. I want to appreciate you for being here. But before we get into the panelists and the conversations, it's important that at this time and hour, we start with the weather forecast. This is how the weather looks like this morning. All right, it was quite chilly this morning. I was personally rained on a bit, and I want to hear from the panelists how they are feeling, how they are doing. Dr. Edgar Githua, who is a diplomacy, peace, and security analyst, thank you for creating time. What are your opening remarks? Did you meet any rivers, any blocked roads this rainy morning?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks. I was lucky I got here safely, but along the way I could see blocked drainages, a lot of, you had to wade through some pools of water. And this is happening in the middle of a capital city. So, yeah, there's a bit of that. Yeah, but I'm lucky I didn't get rained on.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's hear from other panelists this morning. Dr. Moses Onyango, the Chair, International Relations Department. It's good to have you, sir.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been raining a lot and flooding everywhere. So on my way here, it was all right. But as Dr. Edgar was saying,
yes.
There are some blocked drainages, but we managed to get here safely.
All right.
Yes.
And of course, I'll come back to you to understand if this blocked drainages are being seen for the first time, or it's a culture we have, or it's something we can sort or cannot be sorted. Also with us is Dr. Samuel Kitilewa, who's a diplomacy and international relations expert. We have waited to host this panel as it is. Welcome to the show, sir.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here. Yes, as I was coming here, there's a lot of floods along the way, and at some point, my driver had to try to maneuver to brave the, blocked roads. But we thank God, we're here at last, and I think there's need to relook or to rethink the drainage system, particularly in the capital city.
All right.
Yes.
Gentlemen, is it a matter of relooking the drainage system, urban planning? Because we are seeing the situations in China, Burundi, Tanzania, across board, even the UK, just this morning looking at, and they had very serious alert on floods. Would we solely say it is lack of planning, or is these are disasters that need further inventions and preparations?
Yeah, thanks, Doris. I think it's a bit of both of what you've said. In my view, number one, the infrastructure, the urban planning, the infrastructure development in the city. Unfortunately, we hear this and we may not know exactly where that. There are certain people. I remember there's some time back during the Kibaki administration where the Grand Coalition government, at some point, I can't remember which minister was in, I think it was probably Honorable Orengo. He talked about people constructing next to riparian reserves. So there is a bit of that in Nairobi where urban planning has, quote unquote, been left without being supervised properly. So you find there are people who construct housing on waterways, on already known waterways. Therefore, because, for example, if you look at what's happening in Syokimau, what you just showed us on the Daily Nation.
Yes.
I am not a hydro engineer. I am not, I'm not a hydro engineer and all that, and a civil engineer. But my feeling is, for water to gravitate and, create such havoc in an estate, there was probably an ancient waterway around that path. The topography of the land should inform urban planning so that people understand that even as we are building the drainages, if there are flash floods or if there is extra heavy rainfall, there is a particular waterway that, there's a path that water is going to follow, and some people and some infrastructure is going to get overwhelmed. So I think proper urban planning, replanning, rethinking, like what Dr. was saying, rethinking urban planning. And now that we have this estate in Syokimau and you cannot move it, how can we construct drainage around it to protect the lives of the people living in this estate? But
this is not the first time we speak of people building on the riparian lands. In fact, we had access on a number of buildings brought down. Is it that Kenyans are stubborn? Is that we lack land and the scarcity of this land resource? Dr. Onyango.
It's not that Kenyans lack land.
Yes.
The flooding is affecting, as you rightly put it, it's affecting everyone globally. But what we have to ask ourselves is to what extent different governments prepared for the floods. So you find that in China, probably the way it's affecting people is different from the way it's affecting Kenyans, based on, because one of the functions of government is emergency response. So to what extent is our government ready to respond to such emergencies? Now, when it comes to planning, of course, we also look at to what extent is our government, to what extent that is care in terms of planning, spatial planning, for example, making sure that the drainage systems are working properly. But as we said, floods are affecting everyone, and we just need to look at the emergency responses of different governments.
So in your assessment, being an expert in your field, and you have, of course, lived, I could assume, a number of years in this country. This is not the first time we're experiencing floods. Do you see Kenya as vigilant enough or making effort enough in that preparedness for the seasons like this?
Of course not.
Okay.
Of course not.
Why?
Given from what we know, Kenya is a country of either droughts or floods. But every time there's drought, we are calling for emergency response food stuff. And when there's floods, we also always react as if it's something we did not expect. So we need proper planning and proper emergency response systems in Kenya to make sure that we take care of this kind of emergencies, because it's part of the function of any effective government.
Indeed, we'll be talking deeper about that, because what we're looking at now is just discussing these headlines, and floods have taken to the front pages of quite a number of them. Daktari Professor Kitelewa, just looking at that headline and your input on the floods, preparedness, management, especially in as far as governments are concerned.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. From where I sit, I think the issue of floods is a global calamity, so to speak. And I think it is because of a lack of environmental alertness, issues of climate change and global warming have made the global community to be under siege from floods and other environmental extremes. And over the years, in Kenya, so to speak, from independence up to now, I think we have not really soberly looked at how we can mitigate against environmental hazards. Issues of disaster management are not really into place. And you realize that every other time when there is a drought or floods, like Dr. Onyango said, it comes and catches us unawares, and we have been kind of doing management by crisis. So I think there's need to have environmental experts, water engineers, urban planners, to sit together to look at how the architecture can be managed, so that we don't every other year face the same issues of extreme drought or floods. But so to speak, it's a global calamity.
Global calamity. I'll be giving you a story and updates on the same, because, gentlemen, as we're speaking, we have deaths that have occurred, displacements. I think over 35 people by now. And the Red Cross Society has said that the flooding in the East African nation, that is Kenya, has of course killed over 30 people and displaced more than 11,000, probably more. And the agency said it has rescued over 180 people from waters across the country. This is just, of course, stories that are still developing, so it wouldn't really be an exact number at this point in time. But speaking of relief food and humanitarian services, because now it's really intense on them, and I think one of the panelists has said, I think Dr. Onyango here said, we seem not to be prepared. When there's extreme famine, we look for relief and help. When there is extreme floods, we run that same direction. So in your understanding and expertise, do you think we can minimize that? And because you have a meteorological department, is it that it's underfunded? Is it that the communication is not clear?
Yeah, thanks, Doris. I think it's not For me, I don't think the meteorological department, it's not an issue of underfunding them, because they have the best not only technicians and expertise in their departments, but they're able to realize and probably understand the weather patterns and the cycle. I know climate change has pretty much changed a lot of those things, but they're even able to get early warnings from bigger meteorological departments from other countries that there is this cloud moving, there is this, there's this disaster that's about to happen. For me, I'm trying to look about, I'll go back to what Dr. Onyango was talking about, disaster preparedness, and then long-term planning. Long-term planning, how? Let's even walk out of Nairobi. Areas like Budalangi, where perennially every year we have those floodings taking place, and these are things that have happened in successive governments. The big question is, where is the political will in solving that problem once and for all? Bringing in hydro engineers. I mean, ask the Dutch to come and help if you really, because I know they've really done a lot of this back in their country, to build dikes if that is what is required, canals, waterways, dams. Because, for example, as I was coming here, I was just imagining if there was a way we could redirect all this water and harvest it somehow, and then Nairobi would also not have the shortage of water, perennial shortage of water that it always has. Where is that long-term, long-range planning in terms of the country? So we're just talking about the parent and the line ministries concerned, thinking about, let's put this, let's just have a permanent solution. Let's get rid of some of these problems. Number one, for the county government of Nairobi, unblock all drainages. When there is no rain, go and unblock all the properly.
Has the climate change made it a bit hard for people to predict when there will be rain and when there is no rain? Because you're saying they should unblock them.
I hear you, but
yes.
I'm thinking, like soldiers, if you prepare in peacetime, you suffer less during wartime. So I'm just thinking, if we prepare when there are no rains, making sure that all our drainages are not blocked, garbage is collected in the right places. And like we were saying, people are constructing houses where they're supposed to construct. Nobody's constructing in riparian reserves. When now we get this disaster, it becomes easier to manage, because at least we will minimize the flooding if all the drainages are working, because the water will flow and probably go and collect where it's supposed to collect. If people are not constructing and blocking waterways, then it means some estates will not suffer. So it's urban planning and just having the proactiveness of government, preparing during peacetime when there are no floods. Because now climate change is here with us.
Right.
But we're not going to be reactionary. We can't remain reactionary. We will not go anywhere remaining reactionary. So, preparing during peacetime for wartime.
At some point, I am left curious thinking, and then all the other governments across probably reactionary, because what I'm looking at the headlines here is, and I think this is from one of the international headlines, speaking on the evacuation happening in China, and 100,000 people, gentlemen, 100,000 people evacuated from China flood zone just a few hours ago. So this shouldn't sound to the viewer like it's 2023. It is happening in China, and we're seeing videos showing cars being washed away and communities underwater after major flooding in China. Dr. Onyango.
I'm glad we...
And you remember China and Japan have one of the best technologies, if we're to speak.
Yes, I'm glad we are looking at this from a global perspective.
Yes.
And as I said, that governments across board globally have specific functions. And some of the functions of the government is extractive, distributive, emergency response, regulative. Now, this falls within responsive emergency function. Now, it is not unusual in developing countries to lack resources because of poor planning. Now, what you have mentioned about China is different from what is happening in Kenya. For example, the humanitarian response in Kenya, we are now disturbed in terms of where are we going to get money to rescue. We have so much death, we have so much injuries. In China, the way you have read it, there's a response from government. And if you look at the Chinese response, you'll find that they even have proper funding for that kind of disaster. So as it happens globally, we are looking at different responses from different governments, and how prepared are these governments in terms of these responses, and what resources do these particular governments have. And therefore, when we look at it that way, we find that there are differences in terms of how the approach is made.
And I'm hoping to dig deeper from where I sit into how these particular different governments are responding. But to be more specific, because I'm coming back to you, Honorable Professor Kitelewa, China has evacuated more than 100,000 people as heavy rains continue to lash the southern province of Guangdong. All right. Authorities raised the highest level of alarm on Tuesday, all right, as the storms showed no sign of letting up. So far, flooding has already killed 4 people, with another 10 reported missing in just the latest episode of extreme weather to hit China as the climate change affects the country. But they issued strong alerts. I think we should start from there.
Yes.
On Tuesday, remember, into this morning, the flood still wreaking havoc. Professor, he said something about it is expected, all right, that we have responsive emergency functions. But in your analysis, in your expertise, how are we approaching this today? Because, of course, we've seen Syokimau. We've also seen members of the parliament, I shared with you on the front page of one of the dailies, in a boat trying to access an area.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, as I said earlier, the issue of floods and extreme weather conditions is a global calamity. And we can take it back to global negligence on mitigating against climate change hazards. Global warming has taken its portion in contributing towards the same. Whereas climate change is a natural issue, we within the global community should be able to mitigate against it. For example, the forest cover has been depleted, and we know that rainfall is created out of the conventional aspect, and from that point, deforestation has caused soil erosion. It has affected the water towers in most countries. So when heavy rainfall hits, there's no forest cover. Soil erosion takes its part, and because of corruption and negligence caused by human activities, people have put up houses or estates on riparian areas, such that now the water that comes out of heavy rains cannot find its way to either rivers or the seas. So what I would recommend is that we come up with a very serious campaign on water harvesting mechanisms, such that should heavy rains come, the much water is captured either into mega dams or, like I recommended in my thesis, we should come up with a legislation whereby every household, every industry, every school, every university should have water harvesting mechanisms, so that this much water that comes out of heavy rains does not go to cause havoc to humankind. Rather, it is captured and it is made useful for human use, and to some extent even for industrial use. So that's my take.
All right, because gentlemen, even as we're speaking, there are Kenyans who are homeless, displaced. But I will come back to matters responsive, emergency responsive functions, because I'm looking at other countries and I'm hearing things like, emergency shelters being put up. Now, when you tell the Kenyan watching this morning, or in Pakistan, even in Pakistan, they have some very serious floods, and you say, please move to higher grounds, please leave the flood-prone areas, which is their homes. The question still remains, coming to the media and to the hotline receivers, where do we go to? Is that planned? What could be the procedure? And if you can also compare to what you've seen in other countries, perhaps. Are we getting it right? Because you tell them to leave to higher grounds. Are they guided where? Are there emergency shelters, even as we're speaking? Or what is happening, or what should happen?
Yeah, thanks, Doris. I think we could borrow a leaf from countries, developed countries, let's say like the US, and what China has done. At least in the US, I think there's a department. I've seen it when they faced various hurricanes and typhoons off the eastern seaboard or the western seaboard. I think there's a department that is a federal department that is mandated to respond to emergencies. I don't know that it's called FEMA. I keep forgetting the name. So in Kenya have a similar. I don't know where in Kenya that resides, in which ministry it resides, disaster response. I mean, we've seen Red Cross take up so many of these causes in Kenya until sometimes we really wonder which ministry really manages this. But you need to understand, we need to have a department that is tasked, all right? I've seen the Kenyan Defense Forces every once in a while go out of their way to be involved in disaster management and in trying to evacuate people. But I think we need an emergency response mechanism that is fully funded and fully prepared. Right now, we'd probably be seeing them out there trying to now, number one, evacuate the people. I saw a clip on social media going around where there was, I think it was someone from the county government of Nairobi that were trying to really talk to the Syokimau people. The OCS was there trying to tell them, we will get trucks to evacuate whoever needs to be evacuated and all that. But we also need a well-funded, a robust team that can now, this is what we are seeing in Nairobi, but now what about in Budalangi? We need a team that can go to any part of the country, wherever there are these flash floods, wherever there are these disasters, that can really kick into action, a well-funded department that is on standby 24/7. And like we said, I think what Dr. here was saying, early warning systems, because when this happened, there was, China warned their citizens that this is going to happen, move. And the ones who cannot move, 100,000 have been evacuated. What kind of early warning mechanisms exist in Kenya? And in Kenya, I'm sorry to say this on live television, when we have the director and the deputy director of the meteorological department contradicting each other. One says there'll be El Nino, the other one says there'll be...
That was last year, I believe.
Yeah, there'll be no El Nino.
But there was clarity later on.
Yeah. But I mean, that confusion at that level, for me, painted a bad picture because they were not speaking the same language. You now make half the country believe one person and the other half doesn't believe. So we need to speak with one voice. Government needs to speak with one voice and have a disaster-prepared department fully funded by the government to just take action and to react on some of these things. And on a larger part also, take people through drills. We see these are in developed countries, people go through drills in case there's this kind of a disaster, an earthquake, this is what you should do. We just need disaster preparedness involves also that civic education in telling your citizens, in case you get yourself in this kind of a problem, this is how you make it easier for government to rescue you so that we are not stranded in our vehicles when there are floods, we're not caught off guard. Citizens also know how to respond and make it easy for government to rescue them.
And you have just, awakened a memory, because indeed in our offices and etc. We have drills, but especially when a fire.
Exactly, fire drills,
gentlemen, I do not know if maybe you're probably employers. Do you do drills in as far as when a flood happens, lightning strikes, or an earthquake? Dr. Onyango, this is a very interesting thing is said. But is it even possible? But also when you hear of the mitigation of floods, which other organization crosses your mind besides Red Cross?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Let me go back to trace this from Dr. Edgar's comments, that the concepts like weak state or developing countries are not there in vain. These particular concepts mean something, especially when things happen. When you say there's a weak state or a developing country, you expect to see weaknesses in particular areas when there's a problem. So, for example, in terms of a weak state or a developing country, you'll find that things like preparedness are lacking in comparison to those countries that are developed. When it comes to fire drills, fire extinguishers in offices and houses, and probably being prepared for any outbreak of disaster. How many of us in our houses or our offices are prepared? You will find that when you go to developing countries, most of these things are lacking, and people only think about them once the disaster has happened. So they would say, okay, let's now put a fire extinguisher because there was a fire break. But that is after the event. So what we are seeing is not uncommon in developing countries. In developed countries, we look at a country like the Netherlands that Dr. Edgar has referred to. This country has claimed its land from water. And the people in Netherlands hardly sleep, the experts, because if they do, the country would flood. They are always prepared.
It's a flood-prone country.
Yes. And as I said, that all these functions of government are also measured and assessed based on the resources that are available at their disposal in terms of how do they release these particular resources to protect their people. So you have read to us what is happening in China. I would wish that you could read to us what is happening in Kenya in terms of responses.
And I want to do that right now. In fact, I'm glad you brought that in because I want to pick this story. And not forgetting, just the other day, Tanzania, our neighbors right here, I don't know if you followed, lost lives, and there was heavy floods right there, just across the border. But now that you mentioned you want to know what's happening in Kenya, let's take this story from the news desk just yesterday. Heavy rains currently pounding various parts of the country continue to wreak havoc and displace Kenyans from their homes. Heavy flooding have been experienced in Nairobi County as well as its environs. The weatherman forecast that the heavy rains will continue until June this year. And until today, some underpasses along the Nairobi-Nakuru highway, that is until yesterday, were flooded, making it impossible for vehicles to drive through, as Vera Mora now reports.
The tough effects of heavy rains pounding the country was felt today in Machakos when a 5-year-old Mtuku Kyoko, who was marooned by floods at Nduini in Yatta, Machakos County, was rescued this afternoon by the National Police Service using a chopper. Mtuku was separated from his father, Martin Kyoko, when the water level started rising. The boy was safely reunited with his family. In the same county, Athi River broke its banks following the heavy rains and claimed the life of one person, while 17 others were rescued in the area of Kinanie and Syokimau in Mavoko.
Tafadhali, tokeni kwa mito. Kama tuko na wengine wako hapa mto wa Mau, tumeaka gari zetu standby hapa. Na tumekubaliana sisi wote hapa kama team. If we see there is a danger, tumeaka magari, hao watu waende wachukuliwe, waletwe hapa, walale hapa, kuna chakula, kuna kila kitu.
Elsewhere along the busy Nairobi-Nakuru highway, transport via underpasses were paralyzed due to the heavy rains that flooded the underpasses. River bridges in Kinoo, Gitaru, Zambezi were closed for a while due to overflowing floodwater. According to residents, the incomplete construction works coupled with lack of proper drainage were to blame for the blockages.
Mwenye kadarasi angefanya vizuri ya kuja tumalizia hii maji, at least tungefurahia sana juu hata kama ni watoto wa shule Unaona kuna venye hawezi pita hapa ikiwa hivi na jule shule ziko karibu kufu.
Sasa hii maji hakuna mahali ya kwenda. Sasa maji hata ukiangalia biashara kama sasa nyumba za yenyewe zimejaa maji. Hii daraja nayo imejaa maji. Sasa tunaomba tuangaliwe sana.
Sasa serikali inataka hasara ikuje hapa, usikie mtoto ameaga hapa ndio wakibie. Sisi tukiomba hiyo serikali ikuje saa hii, yule mtu alipo hiyo kazi atoe maji hapa.
And on the border of Kiambu and Machakos, the swollen river crossing the Ndonyo-Sabuk main bridge disabled all transports and economic activities in the area.
Tunataka kila mtu awe na usalama wake, wa watoto, wa familia na kila mtu. Na kwa hivyo nataka tuelewane ya kwamba kuajiri ni muhimu. Sisi tudhibitishe ya kwamba kila nyumba hapa liko salama kukaa na kuishi ndani.
In Busia County, more than 1,700 families have been displaced following floods in the area, worst hit areas being in Budalangi's constituency, where residents are calling for assistance including food and shelter. In Karachuonyo, Homa Bay County, the scenario was the same. Dozens of families seeking refuge from well-wishers. The weatherman has warned that Kenyans should brace for more rains, which will continue pounding the country until June. Vera Mora, KTN News.
Very well put, Vera Mora, giving you a recap of what's happening across the country and as far as the floods are concerned. Dr. Onyango, now, that's what's happening. We take your remarks before a break, and of course, Kitty Lewa here. But that's exactly what it is. You saw a child. In fact, bodies were missing. A boat capsized at some point, yes. But the 6, were found way later. So that is the situation.
Yeah, and you can easily see there's a police response.
Yes.
There's citizens who are shocked and they don't know whose responsibility it is. Some are saying government, some are saying, no one knows. If you compare it with the story from China, there's a focus in terms of who is supposed to do what and who is evacuating who. So you can see the stark difference. And that defines the difference between developing and developed, and resources and lack of resources.
Professor, the question would be, at some point, someone says, when you are to, check the level of development for a country, how do we even describe or place a country as developed? Development can be in very many dimensions. Socially, matters value, infrastructure. So when Dr. Onyango continues to say, as a developing country, we will not, escape probably lack of resources or how we arrange our disaster management response. After listening to that story recap, what would you say really to just comment to that recap? Because children have involved, you've seen them lost, found. So it is a serious situation.
Yeah.
Yes. Developing or developed. We need to take care of the citizens.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for that question. Developed or undeveloped, we are supposed to live, to coexist. And in that case, I think from where I sit, it's a matter of injecting some element of professionalism in our government ministries, such that whatever we can do as a country, we do it professionally, we do it properly, and we do it exhaustively. From the comments of the Kenyans that are affected by floods, it's like some of the construction work that has been going on has been done haphazardly.
Or it is incomplete.
It is incomplete.
Yes.
And whereas the Kenyans are asking for humanitarian assistance, I should say that humanitarian assistance is plan B. We cannot do it, all the time. But we should put into place policies which will ensure that we minimize natural disasters as and when they come. For example, our civil engineers, our building services engineers, our road engineers, and our water engineers should come together, collaborate, and see how they can work out a lasting solution to some of these natural calamities. So it should not be left to one department or one ministry, but rather it should be a collaborative, integrated effort to make sure that whenever government ministries are tasked with some projects, they collaborate with the related ministries so that we solve this, natural disasters once and for all.
All right.
Yeah.
Once and for all, and I'm, looking at the pictures on the screen on how the struggle is not entertaining at all. Loss of property, and so far we're looking at estates, impassable roads, because what we're talking about is a hustling nation. So this Kenyans talking this morning, there's a mamamboga who can put up a tent. There's someone who's selling clothes at Gikomba who can hardly get a living this past, a few months, especially since mid-March, into now the weatherman says, June. So what are they going to be doing? We're looking at one of the very key papers, the East African. Of course, the East African, this particular daily has it on the outlook, how African cities can benchmark on climate resilience. But what is climate resilience? And also, the World Economic Forum report put it here that communities must come together, share goals, and co-create innovative solutions to the problems that plague us all. Watching this morning, I want you to just leave a feedback on what is the situation on the ground. If you looked for help or have you reached out to the authorities,